panelists to join us up here, and Saliha and you could remain, because if I'm standing, the three can sit as well. So we have Ms. Valerie Isaac from the Caribbean Development Bank, who heads the Environmental Sustainability Division. We have Mr. Garth Simon, who is an M&E associate of the Department of Environment, another accredited entity of the Adaptation Fund. And we have Ms. Rosa Montanez, who is the Executive Director of Fundación Natura Panama, who is also an implementing entity of the Adaptation Fund. So we have two national implementing entities, Department of Environment, Antigua and Barbuda, Fundación Natura Panama, and the regional implementing entity, Caribbean Development Bank. At this time, bearing in mind of the time that has gone and how much we have left, I will just go and pose questions specifically to each of the panelists and invite you to respond to it. You have been critical partners to the Adaptation Fund in implementing action on the ground. So my first question will be posed to Ms. Valerie Isaac, who heads the Environmental Sustainability Division of the Caribbean Development Bank. Ms. Isaac, from a regional perspective, could you share the bank's experience in accessing adaptation funding from the AF? And if you could just briefly talk about any project on the implementation at this time.
Can you hear me? Okay, thank you. Good morning, everyone. The bank was accredited to the Adaptation Fund in 2016. And in 2019, we had a project focused on building resilience in the agriculture sector in one of our client countries, St. Lucia. The experience with the Adaptation Fund for this project has been quite interesting. Initially, one of the things we learned very rapidly was the importance of having sufficient financing for project preparation and design. The bank had some dedicated financing to help with the project preparation. However, at that time, it wasn't eligible to receive I would refer to it as preparation financing, right? So some of the things, for example, important things like the gender assessment and the environmental and social aspects were prepared more like outline projects. However, noting some of the comments made this morning, the flexibility of the Adaptation Fund, it still permitted the project to go forward with having these things as conditions to disbursement of financing. So that was actually quite appreciated by the bank and also the client countries in the context of moving forward and getting things done. Another lesson, another important thing we noted was the underestimation of the time and effort taken to prepare the fund. It was really useful and interesting, his fund, because that one of the things we try to integrate into the preparation is ensuring that the countries are really ready to receive that financing, to make sure that implementation is a lot smoother, and not just smoother, but implementation, the sustainability of the project is highlighted and retained. Thanks. Oh, you did ask me about the project and the implementation. Well, we have the same agriculture project for St. Lucia is currently under implementation. The expected termination or conclusion time for the project is 2026. There also has been some very interesting lessons learned there. But one I'm going to mention is that in the early stages of the project, the government of St. Lucia changed. And a positive thing was that the needs of the agriculture sector, the needs of the beneficiaries, which are about 12,000 farmers, where the project really targeted the needs. So even with the change of government, it did not affect the project. There were some delays in terms of socializing the project to the new government, to the new, however, they retained the fact that this project was really important for the development, and it was aligned with the development plans of the country, regardless of the authority in power. So that was a very important thing that I want to point out. Thanks, Miranda.
Thank you for these insights, Ms. Isaac. This is very useful. Mr. Garth Simon, you are an M&E Associate and Technical Officer with the Department of Environment, and you do a lot of things looking at the SURF Fund, etc. Could you tell us about your experiences at the Department of Environment with working with the adaptation and some of the things that you have done with your projects?
Yes, thank you so much. So I'd like to first thank the Spain Pavilion for hosting us, as well as Adaptation Fund for organizing this event. I'd first like to mention that Antigua and Barbuda as well is also accredited to the Adaptation Fund. I think we would have just been reaccredited last year. And so we've been able to leverage financing from the Adaptation Fund to meet a lot of our climate adaptation goals within the country. And so there's a lot of lessons we've learned through the Adaptation Fund, especially through the projects that we have. We've been able to access financing through their regular funding window as well as the innovative funding window. And one of the most impactful projects we have in Antigua and Barbuda through the Adaptation Fund is our AF McKinnon's project. It looks at physical adaptation as well as integrating community resilience and capacity building to ensure that Antigua and Barbuda can adapt to climate change, much better, much faster, and build resilience at a better rate. So this project has showed us that it requires a lot of approaches to adaptation. You have to look at physical adaptation, upgrading your drainage systems, which we have done through our AF McKinnon's project, ensuring our waterways are properly structured to withstand, extreme rainfall events. Then we have to look at financial mechanisms. How can we support the local community and the private sector as well to adapt to climate change? So through the SURF Fund, which I am a technical officer, we've provided loans to not just persons within the community, but vulnerable persons who typically, cannot go to the bank to get financing. We provide financing to them at, a very low rate, 2%, so that, they can be able to invest in climate adaptation as well. And then we look at community resilience. We also look at our NGOs, our community groups, how are they adapting to climate change. We've provided grants to them, help them to be able to serve as hurricane shelters so that during a hurricane event or an extreme event, persons have somewhere to go in the community to be able to, safeguard from climate change. And then we also look at capacity building and local ownership, where we, train persons, educate persons, we do public awareness, as well as we hire the local persons or the local contractors within the community to be able to be responsible as well to, take care of the waterways, provide the maintenance so that the project, stays sustainable as well as, shows a lot of community and country ownership. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Mr. Simon, for those insights on integrating community partnership in the implementation of Adaptation Fund projects. At this time, I turn my attention to Ms. Rosa Montanes, who is the Executive Director of another implementing entity at the national level, Fundación Natura of Panama. And Ms. Martinez has some extensive experience in environmental fieldwork, and I wanted her to share with us, could she share Panama's experience in accessing the funds and how these have aligned with national priorities over time, and any other insights you would have on your experience in working with us and implementing on the ground. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Fundación Natura was the 19th entity to be accredited in the world. So we are probably one of the oldest in the community, and that helps a lot to organization, because on those days, the guidelines, the safeguards, and many different policies was under development in the Adaptation Fund. So we built together the policies and safeguards with the Adaptation Fund. The process of readiness was very useful in our case because we are an environmental trust fund, As an environmental trust fund, we have huge experience working for the last 30 years, providing grants to NGOs and to community-based organizations and working very closely with the government. But in this case, it was to create more capacity in the entity to become and to play in a different league at the international level. So the readiness processes help a lot Fundación Natura as an implementing entity to start to work and to create a kind of coordination between different governmental institutions in Panama to start to mobilize the adaptation agenda for the country. And that was a very tipping point in Panama in terms of adaptation. Today we have an adaptation national plan. Today we have a very clear knowledge about the most vulnerable areas what we have to work. But on those days, we have to work with the national policies that are very general, not necessarily developed in terms of adaptation. So we have to work with the security water plan. We have to work with the agroforestry national plan. And we have to align all of those policies with the NDCs that the country present for the commitments. So the process was itself very helpful, not just for the country, but to increase the capacity at the policy and at the technical level and at the community base. So it was a multi-stakeholder level process that was developed under the readiness. Then through the implementation of the project, that's another very important thing, we facilitate processes to coordinate between different entities, including the environmental ministry with the agroforestry ministry that they doesn't use to work together for issues regarding with climate. So it was so useful, and today they continue working together, providing and developing not just policies but also actions for the communities and for the most vulnerable areas that was identified. So following the process of the project, the direct access was also useful because we can go directly from the bottom to the base. And the project was developed together with the communities, was developed together including the point of view of the woman. So the inclusion was very important in terms of the gender. And that's another good lesson learned of all the process. So we have today women that continue working on adaptation, creating incomes, and also involved in the young community in their processes. That's another successful history also. So the direct access helps the country to start an important process that continues, so it's sustainable. And right now we are in the second phase for the second national project. So the other thing important and is regarding financing, to continue provide resources to maintain the processes that began, because $10 million is a good amount of money. But when you talk about $10 million to make adaptation in the whole country, it's not necessarily enough. So there is a good starting point. There is a lot of potential for scaling up the processes. The Innovation Fund is very important also because it provides also supportive resources that led us to continue showing the progress that we began with the national project, but it is still important to raise additional funds to continue the processes that have been already begun.
Thank you so much for this, Rosa. It was good to reflect on the impactfulness and level of transformation that as a first mover, Fundación Natura, not only for other implementing entities, but for government institutions, women's and community groups, and that work being continued even today. And we look forward to continue working with you, and we look forward to the support of countries in the negotiations, hearing their voices on the need for more adaptation financing. At this time, I was wondering if there were any other comments that the other two panelists might want to mount before I open the floor for questions.
Yes, just listen, Rosa. Yes, as I listened to Rosa talk about the insufficiency of the financing, it brought to mind the importance of leveraging financing, for example, from the Adaptation Fund to some of the other interventions and making those linkages to have bigger impact. Right? So I think that is something that even ourselves is something that we are pursuing, so that we can make our money make more money sort of approach, because there will never be enough. There will never be sufficient. So, just think of some creative ways on how we can, as I said, leverage some of the financing. And it will be interesting, even though you're in Panama and we're on the, to have some conversations, on some of the lessons and experiences and some of the just sharing approaches. When you spoke about the gender dynamic, I mean, it was really critical for us, even understanding and making sure that women's voices were part of the agri-parks, establishing the agri-parks, because in St. Lucia there are also a few women's cooperatives, because we all know the challenges that women face in accessing the resources, ownership of land, etc., similar in those countries. And so we see the project as also linking up. There's a very successful women's cooperative, and maybe creating new ones or helping to strengthen existing cooperatives, because we know that women also tend to do subsistence type of agriculture, and sometimes the approach can contribute to the whole biodiversity approaches, using organic fertilizers and some of the, several other things that we all know about. This could help strengthen what we do. Thanks.
Thanks, Valerie. We welcome the opportunity to put you together so that the South-South cooperation can continue. Lessons learned from each other. Mr. Simon?
Yeah, so just two brief comments. So, although the Adaptation Fund, we have already done our project implementation, at the end of the day, you still need to scale up, right? So we are looking to tap into our enhanced direct access mobility to scale up, specific components of our projects so that we can reach more vulnerable persons. As well, what we found out is that we want to take, more innovative approaches in reaching, more beneficiaries, ensuring sustainability. So now we're looking at an approach where we would now do more of the direct sourcing or the procurement of most of our technologies that we need within the various projects going forward. We will bring them in, we'll purchase them in bulk, and then we'll make them more available to the communities and the private sector. That way we can, achieve a faster implementation, as well as reaching more persons within the communities.
And I want to share that we have this community of practice for entities of direct access, where entities from the Adaptation Fund and the Greek Climate Fund are part. So this community is a very important space that we have to share between peers about what we have been learned, the success, and but mainly what is not functions, so the lessons learned. And it's very useful for us, and it has been a process that has been supported by the Adaptation Fund and also by the Green Climate Fund. And there is also another thing regarding how we are trying to make the connections between the two funds, the Adaptation Fund and the Green Climate Fund, and there is also an opportunity to show that there is a collaboration, that there is a common vision that we can that we can develop in their countries with the projects, no matter their adaptation fund and Green Climate Fund, because most of the entities or some of the entities that are under the adaptation fund, we are also in the processes to be accredited with the Green Climate Fund. So there is another opportunity to learn of the processes that we began with the adaptation fund and to scale up with the additional fundings that come from the Green Climate Fund. So there is a good practices actually between the two funds and the call for the governments to work together between the two funds and this connection between the direct access entities, because that provides additional resources to continue with the processes that we have been already starting in the countries.
Thank you so much, Rosa, for reminding of the important work of the community of practice that's ongoing. At this time, I would like to open the floor to see if there are any questions. Do you have any questions that you would like to pose to the panelists? Just raise your hand and a mic will be brought to you, and you could do that.
Good afternoon. I'm Federico Sancho from the Inter-American Institute for Cooperation in Agriculture. Just listening to Valerie on the experience of the project in agriculture, as well as Garth, I wonder for the Adaptation Fund, how big is the portfolio in relation to agriculture? And knowing that adaptation is always now aiming towards more funds to adaptation, how are the foresight of future projects in agriculture in Latin America and the Caribbean?
Thank you for that question. Like I said, the Adaptation Fund doesn't prescribe any sectors and themes, and we don't allocate envelopes to certain sectors and themes. However, what we see when we look at our portfolio, based on the country demand and the proposals that have been submitted and approved and are under implementation or have already been closed, agriculture is one of the lead sectors in our portfolio. Perhaps that's not surprising. The other one that's highly represented is water. So agriculture, food security, rural development, they would be around 30%, water, similar proportion, and then we see some of the others like disaster risk reduction that is quite highly represented. The other areas, sectors or topics that are relevant in the portfolio are coastal zone management, urban development, and then you have some like, let's say, forestry, nature-based solutions, and then you have some like health or education and other sectors, perhaps energy, that are not represented very well in the portfolio. So those are some of the sectors that are also very important, but they have not been historically, I think there wasn't awareness that it's that they were as climate sensitive, and of course they are. Everything is climate sensitive, and certainly, you know, health and education and energy, these are all critical sectors. But I think with agriculture and with water and sectors like that, those are the ones that were from the outset considered very sensitive and vulnerable to climate change, and that is why they're so highly represented in our portfolio.
Thank you for that, Saliha. So just by way of numbers, for the agriculture portfolio, we have 169 million, food security, 209 million. And multi-sector, which usually can also include agriculture, 223 million that we've channeled so far. Thank you. Are there any other questions from the panel? we still have some time. Yes, ma'am, at the back.
Hi, thank you very much for the very interesting panel. I was wondering, with more than 81 different funds, and I know you've mentioned that there's coordination between the Adaptation Fund and the Green Climate Fund, but I'm wondering whether you could perhaps walk us through the extent to which there are streamlining and facilitating initiatives in order to enable access to different funding streams. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that question. This is something that we think about a lot. Indeed, we do collaborate with GCF, but we also collaborate quite closely with other multilateral climate funds, especially under the convention, but also climate investment funds, which are not. So we work closely with the Global Environment Facility and climate investment funds in addition to GCF. But we also have, a number of supporters or funders of innovation are also, adaptation, are also our implementing entities. So there are obviously synergies working together with them being able to access funding from the Adaptation Fund, but also having access to other sources of funding or their own core funding. And this is something that is obviously a very positive thing. Particularly, when we talk about multilateral development banks that, for example, whose mission is to alleviate poverty. Well, now poverty and adaptation are very closely, obviously, interlinked, and so an institution like ours with mandate like ours is highly compatible in our mission to other institutions with slightly different mandates. At the same time, we have a number of, I would call them loose partnerships with, so they're not very formalized, we don't have memoranda of understanding, with other supporters of adaptation. For example, in the innovation arena, we try to work with other supporters or funders of innovations in order to ensure that we can support each other's work either by aligning our processes, or not even so much aligning our processes, but understanding our processes. So, for example, if they are going through an effort of identifying promising innovations or entrepreneurs who have promising innovations and need support, and they're not able to support them all by themselves, then we might be able to step in and help support them, and vice versa. So we can actually help each other's work in scaling or replicating, and very importantly, from an innovator's, entrepreneur's point of view, what happens to them if they've managed to make some progress, but they need additional funding and they're not able to access it through the traditional, sources that the way normally innovation is supported. With adaptation, it can be a little bit different. With social impact investing, it's a little bit different. They need this kind of support that the Adaptation Fund and other players among, certainly among those on that list of 70 some that you mentioned. I think I don't remember the number. So we do try to coordinate a little bit, and it's not easy, but we certainly see value in doing that.
Thank you, Saliha. If there are no more questions from the audience, then I will ask our board chair if he has some last words and just final words, wrap up, and then we could close. We're almost at time.
Thank you. Just to mention, well, first of all, it's great to hear from concrete examples on the ground from our partners in Latin America and the Caribbean. We are very happy to see that the fund keeps growing, and let's hope that in the next year, and while we go through this transition under the Paris Agreement and the new carbon markets, we can enhance our resources and support more and more projects around the globe for the South. Like I said at the beginning, the adaptation needs keeps growing and growing, and every year we see more impacts. We had the word from our host, what happened in Valencia the last weeks. It was once again, nature is sending all the signals that we need to address, both through mitigation. Of course, we have to enhance a lot our efforts in mitigation, but adaptation is a residual impact that we are going to have to deal today and in the future, no matter what we do. So institutions like the Adaptation Fund, which provides grants funding for developing countries, are going to be a key accelerator of action. So thank you once again for having us, and I'm really thankful to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And once again, I would like to thank the government of Spain for partnering with the Adaptation Fund in hosting this engaging side event to discuss, what concreteness looks like on the ground, working through our implementing entities. I would like to thank the Secretariat team, particularly Christina and Calterine, who did all the legwork to make this possible. I'm just the face here. And Celia, the head of the Programming and Innovation team, as well as the representatives from our implementing entities who took the time out, and you, the audience, for being here at this time. We know it's a very busy place with many events that you could go to, but thank you for gracing us with your presence today. Have a good rest of the day. Thank you.